Okay, so goodbye Legislative Assembly. Hello National Convention. Again, another government change. All right, so here's where we really see things start to take a turn. We already saw some violence with the September massacres just before, but now we're going to start to eventually, we're going to see that some of the really radical sections of the government, we're going to talk about the mountain in a moment, are going to take over the government and they're going to become so paranoid of the opposition that they're going to start killing them. Okay, so the period when the National Convention begins is also referred to as the Age of Rousseau, because remember how Rousseau believed that the government should be controlled by the general will? This implies a more republican form of government, right? So this is where we see the monarchy completely go away. They haven't killed the king yet, but you're going to see that people are going to feel that the king needs to die in order to truly have a republic. And this is where they come up with these three values of what the government should protect, and that is equality, liberty, and fraternity. Okay, and also in this national convention, in this new government, most of the people who make up this government are Jacobins, and they favor, again, a very Republican system. We're going to see that many of them, most of them are largely well-educated middle class. All right, and within the Jacobins, we already talked about the Girondins, um, but we're also going to talk about the emergence of a new group, a more radical group. Okay, and they're referred to as the Mountain because they sit on the uppermost left-hand benches of the Assembly Hall. And they're the group that are made up of some of the figures that we already spoke of. Maximilien Robespierre, one of the most significant radical members of the revolution. Also Georges-Jacques Danton. Okay, so they're going to make up the Mountain. And also the Girondins, we are already familiar with them from last time, but remember that they are, at first, the Girondins emerged as the more leftist group within the Jacobins. Now we're seeing them be the more moderate. All right, so think about the change that's happening here. It keeps swinging further and further to the left. All right, the Girondins are afraid that the Mountain are going to become too powerful and instill a dictatorial form of government. Okay, and basically, because these factions are emerging, there's a lot of confusion about who's going to take over the National Convention. There's also the influence of this other group. They're not actually part of the National Convention, but they're still very influential. And they're called the Sans-Culottes. Okay, and literally what sans-culotte means is without breeches. All right, so I just have this little image here. You see, this actually is a member of the National Convention. He's wearing those traditional knee breeches. But the sans-culotte are wearing regular trousers, right, pants that go all the way down. So basically, they're distinguished from the members of the National Convention because they don't really have any money. All right, they're the working urban poor. Okay, so they're not part of the National Convention, but they still have a lot of influence over it, and they have a very strong economic agenda. All right, and also, just because the National Convention, we haven't, sorry, just because we haven't mentioned the Sans-Culottes yet, they have been a very driving force of the revolution up until this point. All right, it was members of the Sans-Culottes that were responsible for the storming of the Bastille, for example. Um, the Women's March to Versailles, that was sans-culotte women, all right? Driving the king from the Tuileries, the September massacres, all right? Of course, the September massacres was brought on by the Paris Commune, but it was actually executed by members of the sans-culotte. All right, and they basically fear that the National Convention is too moderate. So again, we see kind of these response groups. When the new government forms, there's another group that comes out and says, you're not going to do enough. All right, just like the Paris Commune said that the Legislative Assembly was not radical enough. Okay, they're extremely favorable of a direct democracy. Um, and they also say that they will engage in a mass uprising if necessary to just to overthrow the convention. So there's already a risk. The convention is a new form of government, but there's already a risk that it could be overthrown by the sans-culottes. They basically demand radical changes that are going to guarantee things like food for the poor. And they also are very much willing and excited about joining forces with the Mountain to try to kind of shift the power from the Girondins. Um, okay, so we're still talking about wars abroad as well. Remember, with the War of the First Coalition, things were not going particularly well for France. All right, but we're going to see that things are going to start to change um, more in France's favor a little bit later. And the First Coalition is eventually going to start to fall apart. All right, so a couple of key battles here. There's the Battle of Valmy, which is September 20th, 1792. All right, we're going to see that this is one of the first, it's not actually a significant victory for France, but what it's going to do is kind of, it's going to be like a moral victory for the National Convention. They're going to kind of have a little bit more credibility and instill a little bit more trust in in the population, which is important because a lot of people are unsure with all these governmental changes. The Battle of Jemappes, however, is the first major victory for France, all right, because they end up occupying all of the Austrian Netherlands by September of 1792. All right, so basically what this marks is that France now is on the offensive in terms of war, and they start to call themselves liberators. So basically, they feel like they are successfully spreading the French Revolution to other countries. All right. Now we already mentioned the War of the War of the First Coalition. We see again the First Coalition is going to be at war with the National Convention this time. Before it was the Legislative Assembly. So in February 1793, we're going to see the National Assembly again declare war on the First Coalition. Okay, so another important thing to realize is that it's not just abroad where you're seeing resistance to the French Revolution. You also see it sometimes within the country. All right, so there's a famous counter-revolutionary revolt in a region called the Vendée, which is represented in red on this map here. And basically, it's this big counter-revolutionary and royalist revolt. People who want to bring the king back. They don't want to have a republican form of government. Um, you'll notice that a lot of these reactions are far away from Paris. So basically, you see that the National Convention is not just subject to foreign threats, but also domestic ones. So what do they have to do? They have to prove that they are indeed the legitimate form of government, and they also have to prevent the royalists from ever returning to power. So how do they do that? They kill the king, right? So they were kind of able to successfully convict Louis the XVI of treason after the flight to Varennes, right? Because I mean, it was clear that he was trying to leave the country. Um, so basically, again, this kind of allows the republic to be the legitimate form of government. There's no more monarch that could potentially take back power. All right. However, the people who voted in favor of the death of the king now have to defend their government that much more because, say, the royalists, even though Louis the XVI is dead, that doesn't mean that the royalists couldn't bring back another king to power. So basically, the people who voted in favor of Louis the XVI's death are going to have to be even more defensive of their government. And we're going to see how that kind of takes shape with the Reign of Terror in a little while. All right, so also they're going to have to get rid of the more moderate section of the government. This is kind of where the Reign of Terror is starting to brew. All right, so again, the Girondins, the more moderate section of the Jacobins, you're going to see that they're going to get ousted. In other words, they're going to be kind of removed from power. All right, so the Sans-Culottes is going to help this significantly um, because the Mountain is very sympathetic to them. Basically, the Mountain believes that what the Girondin is going to do is it's going to ally with the conservatives and royalists so that it can hang on to power. All right. So in other words, if the Girondins stay in power, they could attempt to bring the king back. Right. Um, so you're going to see that Robespierre is going to be very much kind of the engineer behind the ousting of the Girondins. What he does is he he gets this group of people that are called the enragés, which is French for enraged. This radical group of working class people to seize and arrest 31 Girondin members of the National Convention. And what this does is it makes the Mountain in control of the National Convention. So basically, he just gets these people, the enragés are also the sans-culottes, he gets them to just take these members of the Girondins and get them out of government. Another really significant example of the ousting actually no, this is a reaction to the ousting of the Girondins, because basically members of the Girondins are starting to get really nervous about their future, and they also feel that the Mountain is getting way too radical, and someone feels that they should put a stop to it. And so this woman named Charlotte Corday, she is a Girondin woman from the countryside, and she gets really nervous about how the members of the Mountain are calling for extreme violence to try to push their revolutionary agenda. And so what Jean-Paul Marat was doing, remember, he's the one who kind of encourages the Women's March on Versailles. What he's doing is he's gathering lists of Girondin or counter-revolutionary forces and trying to get them arrested, trying to get them executed. So Charlotte Corday, this member of the Girondins, wants to put a stop to it. So she asked for an audience with Jean-Paul Marat, but what she says, she kind of claims to be on his side, and she says, "Oh, I have this list of people that are against the government, and you need to do something about it." So he says, "Okay, come on in. I'll see this list." He actually had a skin disease that made him soak in a bathtub almost all the time. So he's sitting in the bathtub. Here's this little list that he's working with, and as Charlotte Corday hands him the list, she stabs him and kills him. So we see that this is a kind of famous reaction to what the Mountain is doing. All right, but of course, when something like that happens, there's going to be a reaction. So you're going to see this emergency government be established, and it's called the Committee of Public Safety. All right, so this is created by the Mountain in the summer of 1793. All right, and what they do is they try to deal with both internal and external challenges to the revolution. So, they can't have anyone killing members of the Mountain anymore. So someone like Charlotte Corday has to be dealt with, and they have to stop future people from trying to do things like this. All right, and they're also, of course, threatened by the challenges abroad. So kind of these wars that are taking place against the revolutionary government. The Committee of Public Safety exercised what we would call dictatorial authority, all right? So they replaced the authority that was previously held by the king. Robespierre is the engineer behind the Committee of Public Safety. He's very much influenced by Rousseau's ideas. He believes that the general will should basically what he believes in the idea of the general will, but he's also really scared that the general will is going to oppose him, because think about all these members of the Girondins. So what he does actually is he just breaks down. The Committee of Public Safety is made up of only 12 people, and so he argues that the general will is just the ideas of the Committee of Public Safety, which we can see is obviously not accurate. So he argues that he's supporting the general will, but in reality it's a dictatorship that's only favoring what the Mountain wants. All right, the committee, again, is collaborating pretty closely with the sans-culottes, because it is the sans-culottes that helped put the Mountain in power and helped oust the Girondins. We'll keep going with the law of maximum, which is part of the Committee of Public Safety, in just a minute.